Hey guys, just before we get into it, we would like to acknowledge our podcast partners in Beyond Blue.
If you're feeling low, anxious, or need to talk to someone, please contact the people at Beyond Blue. Their phone number is 1300 224 636.
You can visit them on the website as well at www.beyondblue.org.au/get support. Enjoy the episode.
Thanks, guys.
Hello and welcome to the Lystics AFL podcast. I'm your host, John Van Norden, and here with me as always is my good friend Sean Lewis. Sean, how you doing this week, mate?
Going well, Johnny boy. How about you, mate?
I'm really good. I know that we said it last week, but I'm pretty pumped to be back doing things now. So jumping straight into the mental health minute, my wife's grandfather, or Zio, passed away last week, so that's why the episode's coming out a little bit later. We're recording this on the Monday of the long weekend. So it's been a tough-ish week for us. We still have the funeral and a couple of other things to get through over the next few days, but Amy seems to be going all right now, and I think it was just one of those weeks where you need to recenter, think about what's important to you, and it was a good opportunity for that.
Yeah, absolutely, mate. It was, obviously a bit of a shock for you guys, but,
Yeah.
probably, it's probably a bit better now than it was a few weeks ago with, I guess, what is it, up to 50 for a funeral, and
I think
at
all
least
of that
people
stuff
can grieve together.
Yeah, I was talking to a friend the other day who was mentioning that he's suffered a loss during the peak of COVID, and no one could see each other, and it was really, really hard because of that. So you just couldn't really go through the standard grieving process. But yeah, I think that obviously everyone would love for him to still be around, but I think that he passed on a lot of great lessons to the family and even to me in the short time that I knew him. And yeah, his memory definitely won't be lost.
Yeah, no, it's good, mate.
Yeah. Moving on. How's your last week and a bit?
Oh yeah, mate. Look, it's been real good. We've I say real good, but it's perspective. In comparison to yours, it's been good. We've obviously got the joys of a little one. She's currently going through her 4-month developmental leap. So the other parents out there probably will understand what that means, but effectively it just means that she's I guess becoming more aware. I was trying to explain it to you before the podcast, and it basically, babies have their sleep cycles, and as they kind of get older and they become more aware, it becomes more difficult to kind of get them into the deep sleep where they'll sleep for 4, 5, 6, 7, 10 hours at a time, whatever it is. It poses its challenges. It's been a rough few nights for us in terms of, obviously having to be on top and, staying awake to make sure we can kind of carry her through to that second stage of sleep so we can get, a nice block of sleep in there. But, you don't have a baby without knowing what's coming. So, nothing to complain about. And at the end of the day, like last night, I was sitting there singing row, row, row your boat to her while she was sitting on my lap, and she was grabbing onto my thumb, so I was pretending she was rowing a boat on my lap, and she's sitting there giggling and laughing and having a great old time, and you kind of go, well, everything's kind of worth it now. It's those little moments that make the fact that you've had 2 hours sleep the night before kind of irrelevant. So it's a lovely space to be in, and like we're doing quite well. We've had our first outing this weekend to a cafe and everything, which was a lot of fun. Just to kind of, I guess, learn, see how the bub would handle it, and it's also good for us just to get out and have a good chat in a different space other than our house.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Completely,
other than that,
mate.
everything's good.
And we're recording and releasing this in the lead up to football for resuming. And we did talk a
Yep.
little bit about football resuming and what that might look like. A little bit about round one last time, but during our chats over the course of the week, you have a different idea for the way you want to take this podcast. So I'm interested to see where you want to go with this. I, full disclosure, know nothing about what this episode is going to be like. And I've left it entirely in Sean's hands. So let's hope that
dangerous.
Yeah. We normally don't let Sean have this much rope, but I'm trusting him this week.
Yeah, thanks, mate. All right, so I guess over now that footy's coming back, and we've obviously had our coronavirus time, and probably many of the people that listen to the podcast, being sports nuts, watched The Last Dance. I know we spoke about it in the last podcast. Now, what the idea is for this podcast is to, I guess, put you in the hot seat, Johnny boy. Get back to our list management discussions. So in The Last Dance, obviously the 1997-98 season, basically Jerry Krause, who was the general manager of the Bulls, made the decision at the start of the season that it was going to be Phil Jackson, the coach's last season, and Michael Jordan made it public that no Phil Jackson, no Michael Jordan. So effectively, Krause knew that he was going to, before the season even started, he was going to break up at the time, a 5-time, and went on to be a 6-time championship team. Obviously, also at the end of the season, trading away Scottie Pippen, Steve Kerr, cutting loose Dennis Rodman. So there's a lot of things that Krause did. And in terms of list management and looking at football, there's been a few times in our history where there's some parallels. And I guess what I want to look at is we're at this point now where potentially at the end of the season, we're going to look at reducing list sizes. And there's a couple of teams that are very heavily skewed to the older age. And my question is, do you blow up the side and go back to square one, or do you try the process of gradual rebuild whilst trying to maintain, I guess, a level of performance? And so we'll work through that over the course of the podcast. But first off, John, your thoughts, if you were in Jerry Krause's shoes, what would you have done at the end of the 98 season?
Equally at the end and at the start. You can't do one without the other. After the Bulls had just come off winning 2 in a row, would have re-signed everybody for at least one more year, stretch them out. At least Jordan. If you're signing Jordan and the coach, then you would hope that you'll be able to sign at least one of Pippen and Rodman. Maybe you wouldn't. But I think that the way you would have had to have managed it, if this was possible, would be to say, Jordan, look, we know that you're the best player in the game. It's unrealistic that we'll be able to keep Pippen unless we pay him what he's been worth, because he's been playing for unders for the last however many years. If we're going to sign a 1-year extension for you, it needs to be at unders so that we can pay Pippen. And that would probably be the only way to go about it, because it was unworkable from a salary cap perspective, just with so many contracts coming up at the same point and so many people needing to get paid. You could have potentially offloaded somebody like a Steve Kerr and sort of covered for him anyway, but definitely I would have gone again. I would have tried to win again.
Okay.
How about you, mate? What would you do?
I have a pretty well-known opinion. You don't break up a championship team. I've said it on the last podcast.
Okay.
You don't break up a championship winning team. That's just my opinion.
Yeah.
Unless it's inevitable, I wouldn't have done that.
Yeah, if Jordan had said I'm retiring and Scotty had said I'm not signing, then that would be it. But given that it was I'm not playing for a side that isn't being coached by the current coach, it would have just been okay then. So you will sign a year contract if we sign him to another year contract.
Yeah.
And then when they won their third, if assuming that history played out in the same way, because obviously we'll never know that, then I would look at re-signing them again, like extending them so that they have at least a year after, that's not a contract year than the year that you're finishing. And I mean, I saw this play out a little bit with Collingwood in 2011 with Malthouse handing over the reins to Buckley at the end of that season. I mean, ultimately we didn't get the chocolates, but we were very close to being a dual consecutive premiership team under one of the better coaches of the last 20, 30 years. Well, he's got the coaching games record, so he is one of the better coaches of all time. And then
also has, 4 flags?
Yeah, exactly. And then breaking that up, like as in saying, okay, the new coach time, I think that was a bad move by Collingwood in the first place. Bucks is starting to get his head around it, but who's to say that we couldn't have been in the exact same spot with Malthouse, but for longer. So yeah, I agree. You don't break up champion teams.
Yep. All right. So now here comes the second part, and this is driven out of a few articles I've read out of the US and stuff. When Krause broke up the team, he was able to extract some pretty insane value. So regardless of, and this is where I'm talking through with you because you're the trader. So effectively, what Krause was able to do is he traded Steve Kerr to the Spurs and got a first round pick out of it. He traded Luke Longley to Phoenix and got a first round pick with it. He traded Pippen to Houston and only got a second round pick. And these have got some players attached to it who, I don't really know them. So, but anyway, they affected. Yeah. Well, I think the key there is the picks. So they got, Kerr, Longley, and Pippen. They managed to get 2 first-round picks and a second-round pick. And then when they traded Tony Kukoc as well, got another first-round pick.
Oh, really?
So they, basically they managed to turn 4 of those players into 3 first-round picks and a second-round pick on top of their own picks. So knowing that, if you were in his shoes, what would you have done?
All right. So if I was in his shoes, I reckon end of the season. So you've committed to the fact that the coach isn't going to be there. Michael isn't going to be there. I would have done everything that I could have to re-sign Pippen. And because I think that Pippen was good enough to build another team around. He still had 5 really highly productive years being one of the best players in the NBA. And he was Pippen. He was the Scottie Pippen. I think that's like a huge component and factor in all of these things that I don't think that they nailed, is just how much money those guys were worth to the club, as well as how much you had to pay him. But man, if you kept Pippen and you kept most of the band together after that, you would have definitely had better membership results over the next 4, 5, 6 years as well. You would have had it. You would have had it straight away. You would have had a captain. From memory, the Bulls haven't been a star team since then.
No, they had a couple of seasons when Derrick Rose was
they made finals,
going crazy.
Yeah, they made finals, but I don't think they didn't win a championship. I don't think they made the NBA finals either. They might have made a conference finals, but
yeah. I don't think they've been back to the championship round since.
Which is hard. It's hard, but I wouldn't. Do you have the ages of the guys that they offloaded at that time? As if the age that Longley was at, yeah.
That most of them would have been late 20s, early 30s, I would guess.
Yeah, and I mean, if you saw them late 20s, NBA players can play until early 30s quite easily, especially centers. So I would have kept them all together, regardless. I think that what you should start doing when you are trying to rebuild and you have a champion team is start using all of your draft picks and acquiring additional draft picks for fringe players. I mean, I said this with Hawthorn when they were at their peak after the grand final and they were offered a first round draft pick, reportedly offered a first round draft pick for Langford. Do it. Just do I know that you have to get player approval for this sort of trades, but encourage those players that are on the bottom part of your list anyway, really, sitting somewhere between 15 and 30, encourage them to move on for more money. Encourage that, bring in more draft picks, but keep your stars.
Yeah. Okay. Now you've kind of jumped into where I wanted to get to. So good work. This will teach us to not talk to you about what's in the episode. We'll get back to Hawthorn in a minute, but so we'll take it over to football. I guess the reason why I wanted you to kind of dissect is just to get you thinking around it, and the reason is because I know in The Last Dance, and we all view Jerry Krause as a bit of the villain because he didn't want the band to continue effectively, but when you actually analyze what he managed to get out of it, which was just a huge draft haul, and that's remembering that he didn't get anything from Michael Jordan and pretty much had to let Scotty walk. Got some awesome value out of it, and at the end of the day, the guys that they picked just didn't come on. Mind you, there was some of the guys they picked. Did actually do some good stuff just with other teams afterwards. So Ron Artest is one that they picked up, and that sort of thing. So I guess it's just more wanting to work through it. And then I guess now coming across to football, probably one of the more famous clubs to blow themselves up. Not that it's in our recent memory because it was so long ago. But being a Melbourne supporter, I'm obviously well aware of it. And it's back in 1964, trading Ron Barassi, so our Michael Jordan effectively, across to Carlton. And also basically sacking Norm Smith the following season, which is the Phil Jackson. And it's really kind of interesting when you see, football is an 18 person on the field sport, but you do have those, I guess, transcendent figures, the Buddies and Chris Judds and these sorts of things who, maybe not the superstardom that we're talking about with MJ, but they're transcendent to their teams and everything. And for Melbourne trading, well, we've not won a premiership since we did it. So the Norm Smith curse, as it's called, following his sacking is still in play. But I guess it's interesting to see, like, Melbourne did that without really getting much back, and it's effectively hurt the club for many years to come. I think after this we didn't make finals for 20 something years. So it's interesting to look at it from that perspective.
Yeah, mate. I'm still there. Sorry, I was letting you just talk it out because I know that it's a soft spot for a sore point for you. I find it hard. Like, I don't disagree with trading star players. I don't think I've ever disagreed with that. I disagree with breaking up champion teams that have star players in them. So I think that if you get to the top, you win a championship or a premiership in our case, you should be able to go again. There's really nothing stopping you from using that again. I talk about this a bit with I've talked about it a bit on the podcast before, building up credit with supporters. Something like winning the premiership builds you a lot of credit with your supporters to just trust you for a couple of seasons to try things. And without supporters ever getting really shitty. So you can make aggressive moves, which might mean moving on players or heavily targeting certain players and trying to sort of double down. What you can't do is, as I said, like trade away key figures. So it would be equivalent to, I know that Hodge eventually moved on from Hawthorn, but it would be like trading Hodge after like those premierships, after the first two, or after three, even like trading him after three, even though they haven't won since that point. I have a feeling that would have set them back a long way. So Hawthorn, I think, have managed it quite well. You asked me to keep sort of you want to come to Hawthorn in the future, so I'll try to.
Well, no, we're about to get there. So you can feel free to give the 2015 Hawks. So you're assuming the position of I guess Graham Wright in late 2015 after flag number 3 in a row, and you've got a list that has some veterans in it.
Yep.
You've got Roughhead Lewis, Sam Mitchell, Luke Hodge, all listed as veterans. So on top of that, Matt Suckling, Josh Gibson, Ben McAvoy wasn't particularly young either, still isn't. Sean Burgoyne, 2015, Frawley was probably about 30.
Sure,
or
no.
maybe 28.
Frawley was an unrestricted free agent, so he would have been 28 or 26, probably 28.
Yeah. Trying to look here, who's Brian Lake was in their side. David Hale. Who else have we got? That's a lot of the guys now who we know are a bit older. But yeah, so they did have a lot of I guess experience at the time.
Yep.
You're Graham Wright. It's 2016. You're coming into the draft. What are you doing at? If you've got a Hawthorn Footy Club squad up in front of you, what are you doing? What moves are you making? And why? I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think they handled it too badly, Hawthorn. I mean, I think that Hawthorn. I think the only mistakes I started seeing from Hawthorn was when they started trading away picks for players when they weren't winning. But at the time they were just coming off another flag. You could continue to try to bring in a few fringe players to sort of top up or let people go, sort of as need be. Like Hawks are a really hard case. I think they did well. I think they did really well. I think that they had some. I know that they had some retirements. So Lake and Hale left the side. They delisted Simpkin, who I thought was probably a reasonable player. I would probably might have kept him around for another year, just based on the role that he played in that those premiership sides when he did play. He's an experienced head, which is really what they just needed. I don't know if you could have got him to play for another season, but I probably would have tried to get Lake and Hale to play for one more year and just let them run. It's sort of the years after that I sort of started to get a little bit more suspect on Hawthorn trading away Mitchell and Hodge. I didn't love.
Yep.
Oh, I mean Hodge retired, but then got signed elsewhere.
Yeah. And what about, I guess, Jordan Lewis? Were you okay with that?
No, I mean I wasn't okay with any of those guys being traded away. I thought that, and this is look, they were traded away because they were more valuable to other clubs. Realistically, yes. Jordan Lewis offered more value to Melbourne than he did to Hawthorn based on the position that the club were in. More value, they thought. I think Hawthorn thought that they'd had most of that value and, the club's culture would still carry them through. Hard to say whether that's right or wrong so far. They've made finals since and done pretty well, but they haven't looked like the same Hawthorn side that were back then. And I know that they're different players, but I mean, I'm not afraid of playing Hawthorn anymore.
Yeah.
Whereas I used to, I used to just shake my head at the screen the whole time, just thinking we're going to lose this. And it's similar sort of feeling that what you get. I probably less so. Like I don't feel that as much with Richmond, but I definitely feel it with. I used to feel it with the Hawks. I thought.
All right. So
Yeah,
let
go.
me run through what they actually did,
Yeah.
and you can tell me what your feeling on it
Yeah.
is. So Matt Suckling left as a free agent. He went to the Bulldogs. They got an end of second round compensation pick.
Yeah.
Happy to let him walk.
Yeah. What was he, restricted or unrestricted?
Unrestricted. So fair call.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
Jed Anderson and some picks they bundled up and sent to North Melbourne to get back pick 15 and pick 55.
Sure. Happy with that. I like Jed Anderson, but again, I'm happy when it's like any player that's currently sitting outside of your best 15. I'm fine with that.
Okay. There were some other minor trades there. They kept their picks and they drafted Ryan Burton, Kieran Lovell. So Ryan Burton with 19, Kieran Lovell with 22, Blake Hardwick with 44.
Yep.
And rookies, they got Cade Stewart, relisted Alex Woodward, Connor Glass, Luke Sermon, who obviously didn't play since then. So that's about all they did.
Yep.
There. So it was there, I guess, in terms of list management following a grand final win, is that in line with what your expectations are?
Yeah, I mean, the only other thing is just the retirements, as I said. So Lake, Hale, retired, Simpkin delisted. I probably would have re-signed those three. Just because Simpkin had played in a flag and he's a senior player. He was a very good VFL player at the least. And Hale and Lake were best 22. They were best 15.
Yep. But they both retired. So,
but yeah, I like retiring is one thing. But if you are about to retire and the coach says to you, "Please play one more year," like we can go for we really want to 4-peat. You want it too, and you can't actually blame Hawthorn for this because you can't see into the minds of the people that were retiring. But I would have ideally kept those guys.
Yep. Okay. Alrighty. So now we come to today. So this year we're looking at potentially list sizes coming back in.
Yep.
I've got 4 sides here, and you can probably guess which 4 they are. And I would like your take on what each side should be doing and why they should be doing it. So we're gonna start with the team we've just been discussing, Hawthorn. Okay, Hawthorn have got a pretty heavy skew to the older side. They have what's that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8 players over 30.
Yeah.
And then they've got another 4 players who will be 30 by the start of next year. So what's that? It's 12 players out of 30, let's call it 36. So 1/3 of your playing list is going to be 30 by the start of next season. And then in terms of, they do have a lot of young guys, but there's a big gap in their age between pretty much 26 and 22.
Yep.
They've only got 1, 2, 3, 4 players in that gap, and one of them will be out of that at the start of next season. So, okay. What do you think the Hawks should be doing moving into next year and potentially a list shrinking?
Yeah, somebody just do a quick Google search on out of contract players to make sure that I understand which players from Hawthorn are out of contract when I'm saying all this kind of stuff. In this, am I assuming that lists are shrinking, or am I preparing in case they shrink?
You are going to take the position that you've assumed they've come back to 36.
Okay.
And explain how you're going to go about it. They do have a really large out of contract list by the looks of it.
Yep.
And And then I guess at the end you can clarify if you would change your strategy if list sizes stay the same.
Yeah, okay. Um, well, first of all, I would, based on the old era, so the people that were around for multiple premierships, I would offer them all of the chance to tell me what they want to do. So that includes Smith, like Isaac Smith, Ben Stratton was there for a couple of them. I don't know if he was there for all of them. Poppy, yeah. I think that it really depends on two things. If the players know themselves when their time is up, that's one thing, because there are some players that don't and they need to be told. So, for example, Poppy's time's probably up. I think that he should retire this year, but if he wanted to go around again, you'd be pretty hard to say no to him. He was there contributing for a lot of flags. Burgoyne definitely again in that boat where if he wants a contract, you can give him a contract. He'll contribute. At the very least, he'll contribute to the development of your younger players, and you need players that will help with that. Isaac Smith is similar to that. Frawley is a bit different because Frawley came in for one flag and it sort of held down a key position post. So you could theoretically look at that, but just based on the fact that they don't have many backs, he probably gets another deal. And Stratton was their captain, so he gets another contract. I guess the hard thing with cutting a list is that you have to, first of all, you have to get rid of players. There has to be players that aren't re-signed.
Yep.
So there's a lot of players on their list that I don't think are up to snuff, and would probably need to be cut from their young bracket, even though this is going to skew them towards being old still. I would just get rid of the players that I don't think are going to make it. They've got some project players in there, but some of them have just been around for long enough and I'm not seeing enough from them. And I think that, you know, the way that I always am like with that. There are players that just are probably never going to make the grade. And maybe if this team was flying, you would keep them around because those kind of players that have been there for 5 years and can step in and are ready are good. But when you're not up to standard, you need more better players. I know that we're going to do our list management series soon, so I won't go through and name names of people that I reckon that you should delist just yet. But regarding the senior players, I would reckon that I would be open to re-signing them all, probably pushing Poppy towards a late retirement, in my opinion.
Okay, it's interesting. It's an interesting take. I think I probably take the opposing view. I see this, if we're going back to 36 players or 35 or whatever that is, I see this as the opportunity to regenerate. And I'm not saying you'd cut every old player. I think
right.
Isaac Smith, Frawley are the two. And I mean, if Henderson can keep up his form this year, he probably gets another gig. Stratton and McAvoy I can't see going anywhere as well. It's more guys like Poppy, Burgoyne, even Luke Bruce to a lesser extent. I think he probably goes around another 2 years.
Yeah, Bruce is like 28, 29. He's still got
He's 29, so he's turning 30. He's one of the 30 before start of next season.
Yeah, but I mean, you take 30 at the start of next season versus currently 32 Poppy. Like, Poppy's falling... Like, Poppy was never as good as Bruce. So I reckon Bruce, as a small forward, has 3 years left in the side. Like, 3 years of value, which is enough to keep. But after you said that, I've sort of rethought it a bit, and I tend to agree a bit more with you now. Just because, like, I was doing it in the mind frame of talking about that 2016 team. Whereas Hawthorn, as I said, have made moves that I've disagreed with since then. So I wouldn't feel like the supporters would think, why are these guys retiring? And I definitely feel like it was why are we moving on Sam Mitchell? And it sucks that Luke Hodge is playing in other colours, and it does. Like, I don't know if those things should ever happen. Same with Jordan Lewis. But now that those things have been done, maybe you're right. Maybe it is a year where you can just go, Poppy, Burgoyne, we need you guys to retire.
Yep.
You need
I
to
think
free the spot up.
And what the whole purpose of this is to show is that, in 2015, no one questioned Hawthorn making the changes that they did, and you even said you felt that they got it kind of right. Maybe you ask Hale and Lake to go around one more season, but we just spoke about it. We felt that seems about spot on. Now here we are, 2020, 5 years after last flag. The goodwill of I guess, reloading and going again, and then reloading and going again and again and again, which is what Hawthorn's kind of done. Now we're at the point, I feel, with Hawthorn that they need to be looking at their list and going, all right, not let's blow it up and go back to the start, but just making the tough calls where, in the context, like you said, in 2016, Poppy at 32, you're coming off a flag. Yeah, well, if you want to go around again, we'll go around again. Maybe now you're making the call. Maybe now you're making the call and going, well, 5 years has passed. We haven't got the flag. You're going to be 33 next year. You're not going to get a lot of game time. It might be time to hang it up in the rack. And he's unfortunately, Poppy might have a blinder a season and be fine, but he's just one of the examples that we're using there. And I guess what I'm trying to get to here is, when does the goodwill run out? From the flag?
Yeah, I mean, the Hawthorn fans were obviously happy when they got Tom Mitchell and Jager O'Meara.
Yep.
They were happy to get those players. Tom Mitchell's won a Brownlow since. Jager O'Meara's been a fine midfielder since then, even though he's been injured for a fair bit. In my opinion, the right thing to do was to take those picks to the draft in that year. So keep Mitchell, keep Lewis, take those picks to the draft, and do the same thing the year after that, and do the same thing the year after that. Because when this is where it's hard with Hawthorn to know the direction that they're going in, and what they should do. Last year, they traded Ryan Burton.
Yep.
So, last year they traded a first round pick and Ryan Burton out. So, and got in a right now player like a Chad Wingard. He's a very good player, but they traded in a right now player. So, the thing I find hard about what Hawthorn should do is that the thing that they should have done different things. Now I don't know whether the right path is to double down and say we're still going to try to win it with the team we've got right now because we're pretty senior, or to blow it up properly.
Yeah. So I don't think they need to blow it up properly. I think there's a lot of moves they can make within the team that they've got, looking at their list. The thing that I do notice, and this is something that we'll talk about in the podcast, they only have 9 games under 21 years of age, and 2 of those games are about to disappear off this list. So it'll be 7 games, and that'll be Dylan Moore is the only player under 21 as of the 13th of June.
Yeah.
With any games experience under 21, and Changoth Giaf.
Yeah.
I think that's how you say it.
Yeah.
Apologies if it's not. He's the other player with 2 games, and he's 13th of June. He turns 21. So when you look at their list, they've got the better part of a dozen players. So we talked about the dozen players 29 or older.
Yeah.
They've got a dozen players or more under 21, and a lot of those players, they've got 5 draftees from last year who haven't had an opportunity to play a game, but they've still got another 6 or 7 players there who have been drafted 2-3 years ago who haven't played games, and there's no experience there. And in fact, when you start looking up the list and you get to 23 years old, which is Connor Glass, no one except for Warple and Harry Morrison under the age of 23 has more than 20 games of experience.
Yeah, and this
these,
is yeah. Sorry. You go.
These are guys that have been in the system for 3 to 5 years,
Yeah.
and they've played less than 20 games. So that's, they haven't even played of a third of the games available to them.
Well, when you look back and you go, what were they doing at the draft table between the end of the 2015 season or probably the start of the 2015 season? So that draft, going and getting Ryan Burton, Blake Hardwick, those two young players that are good enough to be in their best 22 side. Connor Glass, depth player. That's 3 players from one draft. Following year, they traded their draft picks out, which is where this is where their lack of what is good coming into the side. So when it brought in Ty Vickery, Ricky Henderson, 2 senior players, draft picks pick 74 took Harry Morrison, who hasn't really come on. Mitch Lewis.
Harry Morrison's come on. He's played 32 games. He's doing all right.
He's doing okay. But I mean, he's not gonna change that side and make them a championship side. But anyway, no. 74 and 76 they took Mitch Lewis. That's great. Like, as in you're getting some serious value from the draft table. 2018 they traded out their draft picks, got Warple at 45. Like, this is awesome. Getting Warple at 45. What a draft steal. The next year, they didn't really get anything. They got Kaczynski at 52. Time will tell on him. Same with Matt Walker at 63. I just wonder, there's a couple of really good players in there. If they, instead of trading out their picks, just used their first round draft picks, used their good ability at the draft, whether we'd be looking at a side that was really, really well balanced in the bottom end with a lot of young talent, rather than a side that has a lot of middle-aged talent and a lot of old talent.
Yeah. And that's really, I guess, what we look at this year. They've got an opportunity, I guess, potentially with this potential list cut. They've got the opportunity to really reshape. And I think, looking at their out-of-contract players, they've got over half their list looks like they're out of contract, including guys like Henderson, Burgoyne, Popolo, Isaac Smith Ben Stratton as well, along with quite a few of the guys that we've mentioned in the younger bracket. So they've got a real chance now to really shape their list. James Frawley's out of contract as well. There's another over 30. So, I guess my thinking on it for this year is that Hawthorn don't need a full reset. I think they can very much do a rebuild on the run. You need to focus on key old players. So maybe Frawley, because he's a key position defender and you haven't got a lot of them, you hold on to him. Henderson, Smith, Stratton, McAvoy. And then I guess the other over 30 players, you look to let them go. And then in terms of the young players, like you said, probably a lot of the guys on the rookie list will be let go, by the sounds of it, if they go that way. And, it'll mean that they'll have a decision to make on Giath to bring him off the rookie list and take up spot or not. But it'll also mean they'll probably have to make some early calls on, guys like Kaczynski, as you said, Matt Walker, those sorts of guys. Jackson Ross is another one who's got a lot of potential, but hasn't played a game. I think they've got the ability to rebuild on the run and potentially even do a bit of that Jerry Krause, and maybe someone like an Isaac Smith they can sneak a late first round for. You know what I mean?
I reckon they could have last year. I think now that he's past 30, you're hard pressed to get. He's 31. He'll be 32 by the end of the season. It's hard pressed to get a first round pick for a 32-year-old. It's more likely to be like a Melbourne style trade where you get a third rounder than an early pick.
Well, then do you look at someone like a Jack Gunston who's only 28? Can you squeeze a late first, early second for him? Is he replaceable these are not questions that I'm going to answer, but that's kind of, I guess the thought process I'd like to see Hawthorn take is see the value they can get out of that older crowd.
They certainly should not trade out their draft picks that they have.
Correct.
They should use at least their first 2 draft picks. I mean, I wouldn't mind doing something like what they did when they got Scrimshaw in. I don't think that he's going to work as a player, but I didn't mind what they did. And if they can get up a 3rd round pick and get someone that is looking to come home, then it might be worth it. But yeah, they just need to go to the draft.
Yep. Cool. All right. Now the next side. Another club who has probably lost the credit in Geelong. They haven't won a flag obviously since 2011.
You reckon they've lost credit with their crowd?
I look at Geelong and I feel that it's been easy to deflect them not making. Have they made a grand final since 2011?
No.
No, they haven't. So I think it's been easy to deflect that, we have to play a final at the MCG or, that sort of thing. And look, in all honesty, I don't agree with the fact that Geelong has to play its finals not at its home. I feel like, if we were talking any interstate club, it doesn't happen. And I feel like Geelong do have that right, but it's also easy to use it as an excuse. And when I before the podcast, I had a good look at these 4 teams that we're going to discuss, and I was a little bit surprised with Geelong, and surprised that there hasn't been more discussion around, I guess, not quite getting to the big dance, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a bit more sympathetic towards Geelong. They've made a lot of finals over that period of time as well, and I think that winning a grand final is the ultimate, and it's why everyone plays. And I might be just saying this because I'm a Collingwood supporter, but if you look at the performances of Collingwood and Richmond over the last 2 to 3 years, they've been pretty comparable. As in games won, sort of threat at winning a flag, but Collingwood lost their chance. They lost that game in the grand final versus the Eagles, and Richmond took their chance. That was pretty much been the only difference. So the last 2 years, one of them's won a flag, one of them hasn't. Both of them lost in their other year in the prelim final, a game that they probably shouldn't have lost. Tigers probably thought they should have beaten the Pies. We probably should have beaten GWS. But ultimately, you look at the team that wins and you give them the credit. Whereas Geelong are a team that have been around the mark for a long period of time, and I don't think they've had the luck required at the last part.
Yeah, but I think it's a lot like Port Adelaide, or even of the early 2000s, or even St Kilda towards the late 90s, where, and even actually the Bulldogs, they're another good example, consistently making finals but not winning.
Yeah.
There becomes I don't think you'll hear one Bulldogs fan say they weren't happy about making prelims, but I think you'll also hear them say, they lament that they couldn't win a grand final,
Yeah.
And I feel with the Cats that fatigue is coming. Like, they're such a successful and such a strong team. 2007, 2009, 2011, and then since 2011, they've got to that final hurdle a few times and just fallen. Or not the final hurdle, the penultimate hurdle, I guess I'd call it, not the final.
Yeah.
And they haven't made it. And that's the thing, like with Collingwood, you guys have got to the grand final. Yes, you didn't win, but you've got there. So you've gone one step further.
Yeah.
And making a grand final, you do get a little bit of credit. But I guess you don't necessarily, you still haven't. Yeah, I guess Geelong's an interesting one because they are such a successful culture. I think they're either them or Hawthorn's the most successful team over the last 20 years. I can't remember which one it is.
I'm pretty sure it's Geelong in terms of wins. And even in the what surprised me was that it was also over the last 10 years. So in that period of time where they haven't won a grand final, or they might have won one grand final in that last 10 years, they've won the most games, which is where it gets, as I said, hard.
Yeah, I think I was reading their in-season win percent. I can't remember what the time frame was. It was a status or somewhere on Twitter. It was like it could have been 20 years, it could have been 10, but it was like in the 69% win rate, and only like 39 in finals.
Yeah, and
So
yeah, I
you know,
again, I think it's luck. Like if you look at since they won in 2011, they
yep,
lost an elimination final, finished sixth in the ladder, lost an elimination final, finished second, lost a prelim, finished third, lost a semi. Then they finished 10th. That was the year that they sort of out of the blue. Then they finished second and second, lost prelims in both of them. Eighth 2 years ago, lost an elimination final, and first last year, and lost a prelim. So they've lost one, two, three, four prelims. If you extend it back to 2010, they've lost five prelims and won one, which is the year they won the flag. The analytical version of me says that you would take that opportunity over anybody else's opportunity. That the opportunity to appear in that many prelims is probably the best record of anyone over that period of time.
yep.
But yeah, the unlucky is where I'd have them.
So statistically, if you had that rate of success at making preliminary finals, you would expect to win more.
Oh yeah,
Is that what you're saying?
you'd expect to have won. Say there's what, as I said, since they won their last flag, they've been in 1, 2, 3, 4 prelim finals. You would expect that they would have won one flag. So if you expect that you lose 50% of your games, finals is pretty close. They finished on top a lot of the time, or around that sort of top 2 or 3. So you say, you know what, 50% of the time they win, 50% of the time they lose. Then they make 2 grand finals and they win one of them. So
Yep.
I think they've been a good enough side. I just think they've been unlucky, and you're right in talking about their list strategy right now. I understand it, and I don't. It's on a knife's edge which way it'll go. I think that they've done a reasonable job until now.
Yep.
Managing.
So we'll get into the list stuff now. Much the same as Hawthorn. They've got 12 players at the start of next season, and another player right on the cusp who will be 30 at the start of next season or over. Obviously, Gary Ablett, a bit like Sean Burgoyne. They've got about the same number under 21, and only really Jordan Clark has games under 21, which is 19. So it's 10 more than what Hawthorn have.
Yep.
But what they do have that Hawthorn doesn't is a good patch of 21-year-old players. So they've got Sam Simpson, Zach Guthrie, Asava Radaglia, Jack Henry, Brian Myers, Lockie Fogarty, and Charlie Constable, who are all in their 21st year, turning 22nd by next year, who have all played, multiple games. So they've got a good little batch of, and then even as you go back up in the ages, Brandon Parfitt, 54, he's 22. So they've got under 25. They've actually got quite a lot of games into players, just not under 21.
Yeah.
Which is showing a good list transition, I guess.
Yeah, and another thing that they don't have, that they have that the Hawks don't have, is a plethora of people that they took in the early rounds of last year's draft, and a plethora of future draft picks. So
correct.
the fact that they've this year were able to draft Cooper Stevens, Sam DeConning, who I really rate as a tall prospect, and be able to get 3 future first round draft picks, or 2 and their own, means that you're sort of looking at a side that, and they also took Cam Tahini, which I really rate. You're looking at a side that's got the talent there that can start learning from these experienced players. So if you do play them for another 2 years, like if Hawkins could continue, Hawkins is good enough. He can go around another year. He's not going to fall off a cliff.
Okay, so looking at the 12 players they've got who will be 30 at start next year, how many of them? Obviously, Danger is going to get kept, but how many of them stay based on what you're looking at?
I think that Harry Taylor retires probably at the end of this year. I think that his body isn't going to go around again. Ablett's sort of already said that he retires. He'll retire. I think that Ablett could go around again. But Harry Taylor's one who I'd want to move on. I'd sort of more talk like this. I'd want Harry Taylor to move on. I'd want Lockie Henderson to move on. And that's probably all. I don't think you can push Selwood out. So Selwood's one who will say when he's done. He might be done at the end of this year. His body's pretty cooked.
Gary Rowan?
Gary Rowan's body's pretty cooked as well, and he doesn't have that much value when he's on the field. If I push came to shove, I probably wouldn't re-sign him if he's out of contract. I don't know if he is. He is. He's out of contract.
Looks like he is,
yeah. So if push comes to shove, no, I wouldn't offer him a contract. But if I had to choose between someone like him or Lockie Henderson or Taylor, I would take him. Just because I think that they don't have enough forwards. Yeah, I think that pretty much rounds it out. So as you said, Danger's not going anywhere. Selwood can make his choice when he wants to go. Blitz has got probably another 3 years left in him. He's got he's a less damaged body. Starting later, so I reckon that he can go around for a little while. They're still going to have issues in the ruck, but that's another problem.
That's all right. Okay, so I guess I tend to agree with you. I think like I guess why I've done Hawthorn and Geelong back to back is I feel like when you look at it demographically, they've got a lot of similarities.
Yeah,
but when you actually cut into the detail of their lists, you'll see that Geelong's probably been a little bit harder. And cut a lot of players, and I mean even coming out of I guess probably around 2014, 2015, they had Chappie and Corey and all those guys leaving. So along the way they've kind of trimmed their list. Sometimes not in line with supporters' expectations, but I think they've definitely got. Like looking closely, there's a lot of good young players on their list that they've got games into.
And one of the things I rate about the way that the Cats have gone about it versus the Hawks as well is they haven't traded out young players. So sometimes they traded out first round picks, like late first round picks, but they were still right in the window when they were doing that. And they delist players early enough, obviously Link McCarthy had upside, but you look at the changes they made going back 12 months. Hall and Smith, Link McCarthy, Jackson Thurlow, Aaron Black, Stuart Cramery, Ryan Gardner, Corey Gregson, Matthew Habel, Tim House, Dan Menzel, Jordan Murdoch. All fine. Menzel, Murdoch, Gregson, Gardner, all probably could have been on the list for another year. Gardner is on another list now, so you can sort of say that, but they're not really up to scratch. They're not the players that are going to take them to that next flag. So take extra picks, go take extra late selections, and fill up your list with people that could be good.
They're the 25 to 32 players that we talk about a lot. They're the ones on the fringes that play anywhere between 5 and 15 games in a season, depending on injury. And they're the players I guess you can afford to turn over a little bit. So
looking at their list this year, and we're going to do this in more detail, but guys that have got to be not maybe worried about their spot, like as in if you're a Geelong and you sort of know the way they go, is guys like Zach Guthrie, Sam Simpson, Oscar Brownless after 2 seasons,
Nakia
Cockatoo, probably has some trade value. James Parsons. I think that probably, I don't know enough about Tucker, but Kennelly probably gets another contract just because he's only 2 years in. Blake Schlenslog, if that's how you say it. Schlensog. These are guys that are been on the list for a couple of years and they'll get turned over. They just get turned over a little bit quicker at Geelong. I think Geelong and Hawthorn are really similar, except Geelong have made a lot of the right moves, as in they've topped up with cheap senior players and gone to the draft, which I rate.
So end of the year, you're Stephen Wells. You're going to try and trim down the over 30s as best you can. So you're probably looking at 3, I think, is what you mentioned. So Gaz, Harry Taylor, and Lockie Henderson being the 3. And you're going to do what they've consistently done, which is trim the fringe players, turn them over, and I guess maintain taking 3 first round picks to the draft.
If the Hawks, not the Hawks, if the Cats make top 4, then they can go again. But really, like you would re-sign most of them. Those 3 players can move on without much of a blip. Maybe you have to keep one of those key defenders if you really are worried about key defensive stocks. If they finish 5 to 8, you can be a little bit more aggressive and go all of those 3. And if you finish outside the top 8, then probably you start to accelerate it a little bit.
So I'm gonna disagree a little bit here and say I think if they finish top 4 but don't win it, it's more of the same. It's more of what's happened over the last 10 years. And at some point,
I just don't see it. Yeah. Go.
At some point, you have to pull the plug out of the bath, mate. Like
when though? Like, as in, if I said to you, without knowing the result going forward, every single year, your team is going to make a prelim final. Would you take that every single year?
Absolutely, because you've got a chance. You got a 25%.
Exactly, you got
25% chance to win.
You got a chance. I don't think, regardless of results, that you can say that's not a good result. But
you've also got to take in history into account, and that's what I'm saying. Is like they have had multiple opportunities over the last decade, and they haven't made the most of it.
If you're calling it a coin toss, their chance of losing or winning doesn't increase or decrease based upon history. It doesn't. So every single time you get there, you have the same chance of winning.
You're assuming it is a coin.
I'm assuming that it's a coin toss.
It's a coin toss. Yeah.
But
there's psychology that goes into that as well.
I don't know how much psychology there is. I don't think that the Cats are going into a prelim thinking, "Oh, I hope we don't lose another prelim." I don't think that they are. But if you're just playing it like you're thinking about it objectively, it's a great result. And I disagree. Like we're gonna disagree on this one. We just are because we're coming at it from different perspectives.
Yeah, I'm not sitting here saying that making a prelim every year isn't a good thing. I'm saying that potentially at the end of this year, we've got the opportunity for you've got the mandate for a big change potentially with the list sizes. And I'm saying that I think Geelong, they've done a really good job at turning their lists over, and they've got some really good quality young kids coming through. They've got a lot of talent under 25. They've got some really good high quality older players. What I'm saying is, potentially this year is the time where if everyone's going back to 36, so a lot of clubs are going to be looking at trim experience. They can keep, we're talking 9 guys about 30 they're going to keep. So we're not talking a huge dip in experience. We're not blowing it up. I'm saying they probably need to go that step harder than they have been. And they've got 3 high top-end picks this year. I would be going to the drafting with all 3 picks, get 3 first-round draft picks onto your squad and get games into them. And potentially, when, Danger's 31, those kids, high-level performing kids, they can potentially take you to that next step. Because what they've got at the moment and what they're doing at the moment with these, good value senior players like Jenkins, like Jack Steven and that sort of thing, they haven't got the kids to take those roles at the moment. But like potentially this year you can go draft that with the 3 first-round picks. So the question, Jack Steven maybe not so much, but maybe Radagolair comes along, leaps and bounds with the competition that Jenkins is going to provide. Things like that is what I'm talking about. And that's where I feel that, this year maybe they do cut 1 or 2 players a bit controversially, like they did with that, like they've shown they can do with Chappie. and move on. I feel that almost they need a mini reset to get them over that hurdle and get them into a grand final. And generally speaking, drafting players inside the first round is going to give you the best opportunity to get a player to play now. I mean, we even look at the King brothers, who are 2 years into their career and they're already AFL quality players. So you can draft a tall player potentially this year, like a Riley Tilthorpe, who's your favourite, who can play, in 2 years' time.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think the Cats definitely need to go to the draft. It's potentially we're talking semantics regarding that other part, but I think the Cats have gone about it better than the Hawks. That's my summary of those two. Now, I know you had another two planned, but I think we're running out of time here. What if you want, I can just give you my 1 minute rundown on the other two. What are they?
Yep, that's fine. So we've got West Coast, who I guess West Coast and Collingwood are the next two, and the reason why I've paired them together is because, again, they're both very similar in terms of, I guess, players over the age who'll be 30 next year, as well as having, players kind of under 21 as well. So I guess you've got one side that's won a flag and one side that's made a grand final.
Thanks for reminding me.
I guess, what do you if you're, I guess, in either West Coast or Collingwood, what are you going to do this year? What's the change up? What do you see needs to happen?
Yeah, I think it's hard because if I was, I think West Coast overpaid last year to get Tim Kelly, which means that they sort of need to lean into trying to win right now. But I have a feeling that some of their older guys like Schofield, who might not even go to Brisbane, rather staying home to be with family and work on the business. I know that the next year will be different, but it just sort of shows me where potentially his mind is at. Josh Kennedy, I know he's fit this year, but he's always picks up a couple of injuries, and he's still a very key player for them. Nat Nui's not getting any younger. I think that they have to go again, just based on the strategy they've taken to date, and I think that they have enough poor young players that they will be able to manage the move that way. But yeah, I mean, as I said, I don't think that they should have gone for Kelly. So, I mean, with so much, which I think sort of commits them to a certain path. And Collingwood, obviously, I think that they're the best side in the comp and should just win it. That aside, I think that they have to just move on some of their players. So, Dunn, he's 2 ACLs and he's a depth key position player. Time for him to go. We've got a couple of guys like a Scharenberg who I think won't get another contract with us, given that he's out of contract and they were trying to move him on at the end of last year and he doesn't look to be in the picture for best 22 at the moment. Broomhead, time for him to go as well, unless he gets in the best 22, but they've been keeping him around for a reason, and I think it's because we don't have a good forward pocket, and that's the role that he can play. We're a side as well who I think we have enough average rookies that will be able to manage it that way. But regarding the key players over 30, like Pendles, then you keep the guns. I think both of those sides, if you can, keep the guns, keep the guys who are clearly still best 10, 15 players, and move on the other guys, because Collingwood have enough young players to sort of remain competitive, guys with enough upside. So, that's how I'd manage it. I wouldn't mind Collingwood trading draft picks and playing for the window. But as I said, I thought that I wouldn't want to overpay. I never like overpaying.
All right. I got a couple of quick names just to throw at you. Varco.
Probably his time.
Maine.
1 year.
He's got one more. Well, he's got one more year on his deal anyway.
Yeah.
Greenwood.
Probably retire, or 1 year if he's fit. Been injured for a long time.
Ben Reid.
He's gone, I think.
we won't talk about Dane Beams because that's still got to play out. I guess, yeah, those guys are all over 30, and potentially, I guess you've already spoken about Lyndon Dunn. But yeah, I guess you can see there straight away there's probably so it's 4 players over 30 who will probably drop off their list.
Yeah, you know,
By the
I think the thing that Collingwood's got as a saving grace is that none of those guys are really necessary. They're not best 15 players. They're players that are best 22 for sure. When Greenwood's up and about, he's the best 22 player, but he's replaceable. It gets a bit harder for West Coast. West Coast have Darling, which makes it a bit easier, but having so much hanging on Hearn's boot coming out of the back line and Kennedy up forward, sort of, yeah. I think that I think that those guys have to stay around for West Coast to be a credible threat.
Yeah, yeah, I tend to agree. I think West Coast, as you said, they've traded a lot to get Tim Kelly, and because of that, they've probably painted themselves into the corner. So I think, say the list size gets cut back to 36, and I think it's going to be felt at the bottom end of the list. I think, guys probably like Josh Rotham,
Rotham might hang around, but there are those other names. Yeah,
Braden Ainsworth, those sort of guys. They're probably the ones that are going to suffer just because I think where their list is positioned and the inability for them to regenerate out of this year's draft and even, even salary cap wise. I think like the only reason, like they've got a good young core. They've got some good players like, they've got Jared Cameron, Bailey Williams, Petruccelli, Allen, Jared Brander. Interesting to see what will happen with Daniel Venables, obviously having some concussion issues. But yeah, so they've got some, Tom Cole as well. These are all guys under 23 who are pretty handy.
Yep.
But I think, but whereas with Collingwood, I probably see Collingwood, I think given that they're going to probably lose a fair bit of the over 30, especially if the lists are trimmed back like we spoke about.
Yep.
I would see them probably reinvesting in youth. And they've got, and, you look, under the age of 21, there's some talented players like Murphy and Quainer, Rantel and Bianco, who we really liked, and even Will Kelly is in there. Stevenson is only 21. Cal Brown, 22. They've got definitely even a guy like Braden Maynard who's almost played 100 games and he's under 24. So they've got some real good talent, especially under 25. You've probably got a core talent group that you could build around. Maybe lacking a key forward or something, but definitely enough talent there. Whereas I'd probably look at the Eagles and I'd say probably not as many super high talented players there, but they do have some bookends there in Allen and Brander that they can use as well. So I think it's how'd you find that podcast anyway, mate?
It was much harder without sort of preparation because I like thinking on the fly, but typically I'm a bit more prepared. So I appreciate the doing it this way given my lack of time to prepare over the last week. But I definitely think I need to do some more reading in future. Hopefully, the listeners found it interesting. It's good for us to sort of get into this mind frame of reviewing lists anyway, because that's going to be starting soon.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess probably the big thing I take away from this is I don't think it's happened in the AFL something as significant as obviously what happened in the last dance, probably since Collingwood, as you spoke about, John. I think it's quite interesting to see that a lot of clubs, I think, are learning a lot from overseas and how to transition, I guess, dynastic clubs. And I really think that's an important thing. And this year, potentially, by the sounds of it, the AFL is pushing pretty hard to reduce list sizes as a form of, I guess, cost cutting. And potentially it's got some pretty big effects, and I think it's going to be really interesting to see, those top 4 teams. I think Richmond's age profile is a little bit younger, so they probably, will just follow the strategy they've been following, which is, keep drafting and just, I guess, trim, like do what Geelong did, I guess, trade out your fringe players or delist them. But yeah, it's interesting to see those 4 teams who are probably the 4 oldest in the AFL, and I guess the differences that they're going to be presented with at the end of the season, and the hard choices they're going to have to make.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see whether the AFL can get that over the line, just because it's really hard to prepare anything. I know COVID's been hard, but it's hard to prepare any list changes with 1 year, like in the same year that you announce it. It's a bit different if you can plan people's contracts, but there would be a lot of players that wouldn't have had contracts for 2 years if they knew that list sizes were being cut.
Yes, yeah.
Anyway,
well, and it's what we spoke about as well, so
yeah,
that's all good.
Well, I do have to run, mate. Thanks again for this. Thanks again for listening, guys. Look forward to releasing this, and look forward to watching some footy on Thursday night. I bet you all do too.
Absolutely, guys. Good luck with your super coaches, and yeah, we hope you found this one interesting, and we'll speak to you all soon.
All right, see you, mate.
Bye.
If you constantly worry that the worst is going to happen, you're not alone. 1 in 4 Australians will experience anxiety. Know when anxiety is talking. Visit Beyond Blue to start a life beyond anxiety.